I'll make them regret underestimating me forever. Her name was Emily Harper. She was 32 years old. Raised in the quiet town of Ashford, nestled deep in the English countryside, Emily had always lived in the shadow of her older brother, James. James was the golden boy, charming, successful, and adored by everyone, especially their mother, Helen. Emily, by contrast, was the one who faded into the background, the quiet one who knew how to keep her head down. Their family home was filled with James's achievements, trophies, praise, and endless stories celebrating his successes, while Emily's own efforts were met with polite nods and dismissive smiles. Behind closed doors, however, Emily was quietly building something of her own, working in hotels, saving every penny, and investing wisely, all without a word to her family. No one knew she had bought the very hotel where her brother was about to celebrate his engagement. But tonight, as she stepped into the grand hall of the Ashford Manor Hotel, Emily's world was about to unravel, and with it, a plan for slow, unyielding revenge began to take root. The room buzzed with polite chatter and clinking glasses. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over the gathered guests, all dressed to impress. Emily stood near the edges, clutching a glass of champagne, trying to blend into the background like she always had. Then she heard it, a whisper, sharp and clear despite the music. "Look, the country bumpkin's here." The words came from Olivia, James's fiancée, who leaned conspiratorially toward her friends with a smirk. Laughter followed, cruel and biting. Emily's heart clenched, but she said nothing, remaining calm on the surface. No one here knew that she owned this hotel, or that this evening would not end with the usual toasts and smiles. Instead, it would mark the beginning of their undoing. Emily's mind replayed the moments leading up to the party. The delayed, almost forgotten invitation, sent as an afterthought, was a stark reminder of how little she mattered to her family. Helen's forced smile when she finally noticed Emily's plain attire, the subtle but cutting suggestion to dress more suitably, and the way Olivia's eyes gleamed with superiority. The final insult was seeing the delicate gold necklace, the one her grandmother had promised her as a symbol of strength and resilience, glittering around Olivia's neck. The same necklace Emily had been promised in a hospital room years ago, a promise never kept. The cold weight of betrayal sank deep, and Emily felt the sharp sting of humiliation. But beneath it, a fierce resolve began to build. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Olivia approached Emily with a false smile, inviting her to step aside for a private chat. Once out of earshot, Olivia's tone shifted, her words cutting like a blade. She flaunted her knowledge of Emily's secret financial support to their family, mocking her modest life and dismissing her as desperate for attention. Olivia's thinly veiled threat was clear. Once married to James, Emily was to stay out of their lives, a mere inconvenience best ignored. The hand gently placed on Emily's arm was nothing but a mockery. Emily didn't respond. Instead, a cold silence settled over her, drowning out the empty warmth she had once hoped for from her family. Alone in the quiet corridor, Emily's thoughts raced. The party's laughter and music felt distant, as if they belonged to a different world. Then, from around the corner, she overheard a tense conversation. Howard Whitford, Olivia's father and a man with a reputation for ruthless business dealings, was on the phone, his voice low and urgent. Emily caught fragments. After the wedding, cash flow, keep them believing. He spoke of her family's finances without naming names, but the implication cut deep. He saw her family, her careful support, as a tool to be exploited. The realization hit Emily like a thunderclap. The Whitfords had no interest in love or family. They saw only opportunity and power. Back in her car, engine off and heart pounding, Emily pulled up years of her secret transactions. Anonymous payments to keep her family afloat, bills she had covered, mortgages she had quietly paid. The picture was clear. Someone was manipulating the trust and stability she'd built, and if exposed, it would ruin them all. Determined, she contacted Daniel Clark, a trusted friend skilled in uncovering hidden truths, and Rachel, her sharp-witted solicitor. She also reached out to Hannah, an accountant known for spotting irregularities others missed. Quietly, methodically, Emily began to gather the weapons she would need to strike back. Returning to the party, Emily appeared calm, almost detached, while beneath the surface a storm brewed. The guests mingled, unaware that the night's perfect facade was about to crumble. Howard Whitford took the stage, raising his glass with practiced ease, speaking of family, legacy, and trust, all while Olivia's necklace caught the light with cruel irony. Then, with a single message to Daniel, the screens behind the stage flickered, and the illusion shattered. What the guests saw next was not a slideshow of happy memories, but a damning exposé. Financial documents tracing illicit money flows, patterns of deceit, and names linked to the Whitford family's shadowy dealings. The room fell into stunned silence. Howard's confident smile froze as he stammered excuses, but the evidence kept coming, relentless and clear. Olivia's face went pale, the carefully constructed mask slipping. Helen's smile vanished, replaced by a tight grip on her chair as reality crashed down. Emily stepped forward, her boots echoing on the marble floor, commanding attention. Daniel's voice boomed through the speakers, introducing her not as a guest, but as the rightful owner of the hotel and the one exposing the truth. Olivia lashed out, accusing Emily of jealousy and sabotage, but Emily remained steady, pointing to the undeniable facts. Security moved swiftly to contain the chaos as a woman in a dark suit entered, an investigator announcing ongoing inquiries related to the financial revelations. Howard's confidence crumbled, his world unraveling in real time. Olivia's pleas fell on deaf ears, her desperation hollow. James's expression shifted from confusion to betrayal as he turned away from Olivia, finally seeing her for what she truly was. As Olivia was escorted out, her necklace slipped from her neck, clattering to the floor like the final sound of their deception. Emily reclaimed the microphone, her voice calm and resolute, offering the guests a choice to stay or leave, her control complete. Later, she showed her mother the decades of hidden support she'd given, shattering the walls of denial and forcing a reckoning. The aftermath was quiet, but unyielding. Investigations moved forward, truths laid bare. James came to her with a humble apology, stripped of arrogance. Helen's voice lost its command but gained weight as she admitted ignorance, confronted with undeniable facts. The necklace finally returned to Emily's hands, not as a symbol of broken promises, but as a token of hard-earned strength. Weeks later, in the hotel's modest breakfast room, Emily welcomed a young woman from a nearby village, nervous and uncertain. Watching her find confidence, Emily understood why she had remained silent for so long, and why now she would never be invisible again. The quiet revenge had begun, and with it, the promise that no one would ever underestimate Emily Harper again. The invitation to James's engagement party had arrived late, tucked between bills and advertisements, as if an afterthought rather than a genuine welcome. Emily held it in her hand, the glossy card embossed with gold letters inviting her to Ashford Manor Hotel, a place that, unknown to everyone else, she now owned. For a fleeting moment, a fragile hope stirred within her. Perhaps this time things would be different. Perhaps tonight she would finally belong. But as she stepped into the grand ballroom, that hope began to crumble. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished wood, the murmur of polite laughter blending with the soft clink of crystal glasses. Guests in tailored suits and shimmering dresses moved like currents in a river that refused to welcome her. Emily stood near the edge, her fingers wrapped tightly around a glass of champagne, feeling the weight of eyes that barely acknowledged her presence. Then came the whisper. Olivia, James's fiancée, leaned toward her friends, voice low but sharp enough to pierce through the background hum. "Oh, look, the country bumpkin's here." The phrase hung in the air, followed by cruel laughter. Emily's chest tightened, a familiar ache settling deep inside. She didn't respond. She had learned long ago that silence was a shield, that reacting would only make her smaller in their eyes. Instead, she kept her expression neutral and her posture still, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Her mother, Helen, soon noticed her standing alone. Her smile faltered, eyes flicking down to Emily's simple jeans and boots before snapping back to her face with a forced politeness. "Emily," she said quietly, the tone sharp beneath the surface, "perhaps you should have chosen something a little more appropriate. You know, Olivia's family is quite refined." The word refined was a correction, a reminder that Emily's presence was an intrusion rather than a welcome addition. Emily simply nodded, explaining she had come straight from work, but Helen sighed in that same weary, disappointed way she always had and turned away before hearing more. Emily's gaze drifted across the room and landed on something that tightened the knot in her stomach. A delicate gold necklace resting against Olivia's collarbone. The pendant sparkled under the chandelier's light, catching every eye around it. It was the very necklace her grandmother had promised her years ago, a family heirloom passed down through generations, meant to be a symbol of strength and belonging. Her grandmother had squeezed her hand in a hospital room and whispered that Emily would need it more than anyone. And yet here it was, worn by the woman who had just mocked her, flaunted like a trophy that wasn't hers to claim. The sight felt like a betrayal carved into her very soul. Emily couldn't tear her eyes away as Olivia moved through the crowd, graceful and polished, accepting compliments with a practiced smile. The necklace looked wrong on her, like a crown on a usurper's head. It was a silent declaration. Emily was an outsider, invisible and unworthy. The room spun slightly, the weight of years of neglect and dismissal pressing down on her. Before she could gather herself, Olivia appeared beside her, wearing a smile that never reached her eyes. "Shall we talk somewhere quieter?" she suggested, her voice honeyed but cold. Emily followed, wary but composed, knowing whatever came next would define everything. Once they were out of earshot, Olivia's demeanor shifted. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a sharp edge. "I know all about you," Olivia said quietly but viciously. "The money you send home, how you live so modestly. Why? Because you're desperate to matter, desperate to be seen." Her words were calculated to wound, soft but merciless. "Once I marry James, it's better if you stay out of the way. Fewer complications that way." She patted Emily's arm with patronizing finality and turned away, the necklace glinting like a trophy in the dim light. Emily stood frozen, the sting of betrayal sharp and sudden. She didn't cry, didn't lash out. Instead, a deep quiet settled inside her. A silence that was not peace, but the closing of a door she had once hoped would open. The hope that her family might choose her had died there, in that cold corridor, replaced by something far darker and far more determined. In that stillness, Emily understood that this night was no longer just about discomfort. It was the moment everything changed. Emily stepped away from the cold, cruel smile that Olivia wore like a mask and slipped quietly into the hotel's shadowed corridor. The muffled music and laughter from the ballroom faded behind her, replaced by the soft padding of her own footsteps on the thick carpet. The air was cooler here, less perfumed and less false. It was a place she knew well, the service wing where the hotel's true heartbeat hummed beneath the polished surface. This was where she felt grounded, in control, away from the prying eyes of a family that had never truly seen her. But control was a fragile thing, and that fragile thread snapped when Emily paused near the corner by the service elevators. Voices drifted to her ears, urgent and low. She moved closer, unseen in the dim light, and recognized the figure on the phone, Howard Whitford, Olivia's father, and a man known in Ashford for his ruthless business deals and icy charm. His back was to her, shoulders stiff with tension as he spoke in clipped phrases. "I need the cash flow steady after the wedding," Emily heard him say, voice tight with impatience. "We just need them to believe it a little longer." His words were carefully chosen, a veneer over something far more sinister. He paused, listened intently, then continued. "Their stability is perfect cover. If they find out the truth, it all falls apart." Emily's stomach clenched as the pieces began to fit together. The Whitfords weren't interested in love or family ties. They saw only opportunity, a chance to exploit what Emily's family had quietly built. Howard's cold calculation revealed a plan to use her family's hard-earned trust as a shield for their own schemes. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm as Howard ended the call, straightened his posture and walked away, slipping back into the party's polished facade. That moment was a turning point. Emily retreated to her car in the hotel's underground garage, the concrete walls pressing in around her like the weight of years spent unseen. She sat in the driver's seat, engine off, and pulled out her phone. With a few swift taps, she accessed records she'd kept hidden for years: transfers, payments, bills, mortgages, all the quiet support she'd given to keep her family afloat without their knowledge. Each number was a thread in a tapestry of invisible sacrifice, and now that tapestry was a weapon. Emily's mind raced as she pieced together the truth. The Whitfords were gambling on her family's reputation and resources to cover their own deceitful dealings. If the truth surfaced, it would devastate everyone involved: her family, her brother, even herself. But she would not stand by and let them be crushed without a fight. With resolve hardening like steel, Emily reached out to Daniel Clark, an old friend and expert in uncovering secrets. She didn't explain everything. She only asked him to run background checks on the Whitfords, quietly and thoroughly. Then she called Rachel, her sharp and trusted solicitor, demanding fast options and airtight protection. She also contacted Hannah, a brilliant accountant known for spotting irregularities with surgical precision, asking her to dig deep into the Whitfords' finances. As the night deepened, Emily sat back, the storm inside her finally gathering force. She was no longer the overlooked sister, the quiet shadow in her family's story. Tonight, she had found her purpose. Tonight, the scales of power were beginning to tip, and she would see justice done, no matter the cost. The party inside the Ashford Manor ballroom continued as if nothing had shifted, but beneath the polished surface, Emily's world was quietly unraveling. She returned to the gathering with a calm that masked the storm raging within her. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, all seemed to mock the truth she now carried beneath her skin. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, unnoticed by most, but watching, calculating, waiting. Howard Whitford, ever the polished businessman, took to the small stage with his usual confident smile, champagne flute in hand. He began his speech with practiced ease, speaking of family, trust, and the bright future his daughter and James would build together. His voice was smooth, rehearsed over countless dinners and negotiations, designed to convince everyone that this marriage was more than a union. It was a legacy. Olivia stood beside James, her hand delicately looped through his arm, the golden necklace gleaming just where it should not have been. Emily's heart beat steadily as she sent a single word to Daniel: "Now." The screens behind Howard flickered, drawing the guests' attention. At first a few laughed, assuming a technical glitch. Then the images shifted. The cheerful slideshow of engagement photos vanished, replaced by stark, official-looking documents filled with numbers and names. The room quieted, curiosity morphing into confusion. Page after page appeared: financial summaries, account transfers, and transactions linking the Whitford family to suspicious movements of money. The documents were meticulously organized, revealing a pattern of deceit and false pretenses that no one could ignore. Howard's smile faltered, then froze as he stammered into the microphone, calling it a mistake, a technical error. He gestured frantically toward the control booth, but no one moved. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a rising tide. Guests leaned in, trying to decipher the complex data, the weight of the revelations sinking in. Olivia's face drained of color, her confident facade crumbling as she stared at the screen. Helen, Emily's mother, looked on in stunned silence, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The proud smile she had worn all evening vanished. James turned toward Olivia, searching her face for answers but found none. The betrayal hung between them, thick and suffocating. Emily stepped forward, her boots clicking sharply against the marble floor, commanding the room's full attention. Hundreds of eyes, some surprised, some hostile, fixed on her. Daniel's voice came through the speakers, steady and professional, introducing Emily not as a distant relative, but as the rightful owner of the hotel and the woman revealing the truth. Olivia's voice cut through the silence, sharp and desperate. She accused Emily of lies, jealousy, and sabotage, a last-ditch attempt to discredit her. But Emily said nothing, simply gesturing toward the screens. The evidence was clear, reviewed by experts, undeniable. The pattern of money taken under false pretenses, shuffled through hidden accounts, left innocent people to bear the fallout. The names may have changed, but the structure remained the same. Howard tried to step away, but security moved swiftly, blocking his path with quiet authority. Elaine Whitford, Olivia's mother, began to weep, whispering urgent pleas, claiming misunderstandings and promising explanations. Emily's voice was calm but firm. "That is exactly what this is for." The ballroom doors opened and 3 figures entered. A woman in a dark suit with a badge glinting under the lights, followed by 2 others. Their presence sliced through the tension like a blade. Without drama or hurry, the lead investigator introduced herself and announced ongoing inquiries connected to the financial information displayed. She requested Howard and Elaine Whitford accompany them immediately. Howard's composure crumbled in real time. His shoulders sagged, his confident voice cracked as he called Emily's name like a plea. Olivia turned to James, clutching his arm, begging him to believe her, to remember their love, to reject the sister who had torn their world apart. But James looked at Olivia with something Emily had never seen before, cold detachment. "I don't know who you are," he said quietly. "I don't think I ever did." Olivia's mask shattered. She screamed accusations, blaming Emily for destroying everything, for being the outsider she had always feared. Security restrained her easily, guiding her away as the golden necklace slipped from her neck, clattering loudly against the floor. A final bitter note in the symphony of betrayal. The room fell into a heavy silence. Emily reclaimed the microphone, her voice steady and controlled. "The food is paid for," she announced. "The bar will remain open. You may stay or leave as you choose." Nervous laughter rippled through the guests. The DJ hesitated, then resumed the music softly. Emily moved through the crowd, approaching her mother. She showed Helen the records. Years of hidden support, payments made quietly to keep the family from falling apart. Helen stared, her expression folding inward, the weight of revelation pressing down. Later, James found Emily near the bar. Words were few, but when he spoke it was with sincerity. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, stripped of his usual arrogance. Emily held the family necklace in her palm, cold metal, heavy with meaning and promise. Tonight had not ended with applause or celebration, but with truth. And Emily knew that truth was far more powerful than any toast. The silence that followed the chaos in the ballroom was thick and suffocating, yet inside Emily, a fierce clarity was taking hold. She stood alone by the bar, the weight of the family necklace resting heavily in her palm, its cool metal grounding her amidst the storm of emotions swirling around her. The faces that had once dismissed her were now filled with shock, confusion, and quiet whispers. The carefully constructed world of lies and pretenses was crumbling, piece by piece, and Emily was the architect of its undoing. James approached her slowly, his usual confident stride replaced by a hesitant shuffle. His eyes, once filled with certainty, now held a flicker of remorse and vulnerability that Emily had never seen before. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, voice stripped of bravado. It was a simple apology. But after years of silence and neglect, it felt like the first bridge between them. Emily didn't reply immediately. Instead, she looked at the necklace, feeling the history it carried, the promises broken, the strength forged in quiet resilience. This was more than a family heirloom. It was a symbol of everything she had endured and overcome. The party didn't end with cheers or applause. Instead, it dissolved into whispered conversations, guests drifting away in small groups, their faces etched with disbelief. The music softened, the sparkle of the chandeliers dimmed, and the night settled into a fragile calm. Emily watched as her mother, Helen, sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the proud facade shattered. Helen's eyes met Emily's briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. No words could undo the years of neglect, but the truth had finally been spoken. In the days that followed, the world seemed to exhale after holding its breath for too long. Investigations moved forward with a measured pace, statements were taken, meetings held behind closed doors, and the Whitford family's influence began to unravel. The media buzzed quietly at first, then with growing intensity, as the story of deceit and betrayal spread beyond Ashford. Emily stayed out of the spotlight, watching from a distance as justice wove its slow, relentless path. James came by a few days later, unannounced and unprepared. There were no grand gestures or excuses, just a man stripped of certainty, seeking some form of redemption. "I kept replaying the signs I ignored," he confessed quietly. "I never wanted to see what was right in front of me." Emily listened, the weight of years pressing on her chest, and finally replied, "Healing doesn't start with explanations, James. It starts with listening." His nod was slow, as if the concept was foreign but necessary. Helen's call came soon after, her voice lacking the authority it once held, replaced by a hesitant wait. "I didn't know," she said simply. Emily's response was firm, a boundary drawn in the sand. Not knowing isn't the same as not being responsible. She showed her mother the records again, the hidden payments, the years of silent sacrifices made to keep the family whole. Helen's tears were quiet and raw, not seeking forgiveness, but an opening for honesty they had never shared before. The necklace returned to Emily without ceremony. She didn't wear it immediately, choosing instead to cradle it in her hands, feeling the cool metal settle like a promise kept, even if it arrived late. It was a symbol not of perfection, but of resilience, a quiet testament to survival and strength. Their family was far from healed. The cracks ran deep, and some wounds refused to close. But the pretense, the silence, the neglect, all had ended. And in that ending, Emily found a new beginning, one where she no longer needed to shrink or hide, where justice was not loud or vengeful, but steady and undeniable. Some endings aren't clean, they're honest. And honesty, Emily had learned, was the first step toward peace. Weeks slipped by like whispered secrets, the heavy weight of that night still settling over Ashford Manor and the Harper family. Emily moved through the days with a quiet determination, the sting of betrayal replaced by a simmering resolve. The necklace, now safely tucked away in a small velvet box, was a reminder not just of what had been taken from her, but of what she was reclaiming, her dignity, her voice, her power. The hotel, once just a means to an end, had become her sanctuary and her battleground. She spent long hours walking its polished corridors, overseeing staff, checking accounts, and planning the next steps. Her team, Daniel and Hannah, worked tirelessly behind the scenes, unraveling the Whitfords' tangled web of deceit. Each new discovery was a quiet victory, a piece of the puzzle falling into place. But Emily knew the fight was far from over. One chilly morning, as the fog rolled over the rolling hills surrounding Ashford, Emily hosted a small breakfast in the hotel's sunlit dining room. The room was modest but warm, filled with the soft murmur of early conversation and the clink of cutlery. Sitting across from her was a young woman named Sophie, fresh from a tiny village nearby, eyes wide with nervous hope. Sophie reminded Emily of herself, a girl unsure if she belonged in a world that seemed determined to overlook her. Emily watched Sophie carefully, seeing the hesitation in her shoulders slowly ease as she spoke about her dreams and fears. It was a simple moment, but for Emily it held profound meaning. She understood what it was to feel invisible, dismissed, and underestimated, and she was determined to make sure Sophie and others like her would not have to endure the same silent struggle. Outside, the news of the Whitford scandal continued to ripple through the town and beyond. The media, once hungry for the glamorous engagement, now feasted on the unraveling truth. Yet Emily kept her distance, refusing to be drawn into the spectacle. This was not about fame or revenge for its own sake. It was about justice, about exposing hypocrisy, about quiet, relentless reclamation of what was rightfully hers. At night, she allowed herself brief moments of reflection. The pain of rejection, the years of invisibility, still echoed faintly, but they no longer controlled her. Instead, they fueled a steady fire beneath her calm exterior. She was no longer the overlooked sister, the quiet builder of stability. She was a woman who had taken back her space, who had exposed lies wrapped in family ties, and who was quietly reshaping her future. Emily knew the road ahead would be challenging, rebuilding trust, repairing fractured relationships, and navigating the fallout from the exposure would test her in ways she hadn't imagined. But she was ready. The silence that had once been her refuge was now her weapon, and the world would no longer underestimate Emily Harper. One unexpected afternoon, as Emily sifted through the hotel's archives, a trove of old documents and forgotten ledgers, her eyes caught on a leather-bound folder tucked away behind some dusty files. Curious, she pulled it out, revealing correspondence between the Whitford family and a series of shell companies, dates spanning several years. The letters hinted at financial dealings far more extensive and sinister than anyone had suspected. This was the leverage she needed, proof not just of fraud, but of deliberate, calculated deception designed to exploit not only her family, but countless others. Her breath caught as she absorbed the implications. The Whitford scheme wasn't just about her family's money. It was a sprawling network of lies and manipulation reaching far beyond Ashford. For the first time, Emily's plan for quiet retaliation took on a new dimension. This was no longer just about protecting her own. It was about exposing a web of hypocrisy and corruption that had been hiding in plain sight. With this discovery, Emily's resolve hardened. She called Daniel and Hannah into a private meeting late that evening, sharing the folder's contents and outlining a new strategy. Every detail would be scrutinized, every connection uncovered. They would build a case so airtight that no one could deny the truth or evade responsibility. It was a daunting task, but Emily's calm authority steered the team forward, each step measured and precise. At home, the quiet moments grew charged with anticipation. Emily's thoughts churned as she considered the fallout that awaited the Whitfords and those who had enabled them. She imagined the faces behind the polished facades, their carefully crafted lies unraveling under the weight of undeniable evidence. The power dynamic was shifting, and Emily could feel it in every interaction, every phone call, every whispered conversation. Yet beneath the growing storm, Emily remained composed. She had learned that true power did not come from loud declarations or dramatic confrontations. It came from patience, from knowing when to strike and when to wait. Her revenge would be a slow, deliberate unveiling, a reckoning that would leave no room for denial or escape. The necklace, once a symbol of broken promises, now rested on her desk, gleaming softly under the lamplight. It was a quiet reminder of the journey she had undertaken, from invisibility to strength. Emily allowed herself a small, private smile. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she felt in control. Outside, the world continued unaware of the storm quietly gathering beneath the surface. But Emily Harper was ready. And when the time came, the Whitfords would learn exactly what it meant to be truly underestimated. Armed with the new evidence, Emily moved with calculated precision. She coordinated with Daniel and Hannah to meticulously compile the information, connecting the dots between the Whitfords' shadowy companies and their hidden transactions. Each revelation peeled back another layer of deception, exposing a network of greed and manipulation that reached far beyond the confines of Ashford Manor. This was no longer a family squabble. It was a scandal that could bring down powerful players and reshape the local business landscape. Emily's lawyer, Rachel, worked tirelessly alongside them, preparing legal strategies and ensuring every piece of evidence was admissible and unassailable. Emily trusted Rachel implicitly. Her sharp mind and unwavering loyalty were indispensable in the battle that lay ahead. Together, they crafted a plan to bring the truth into the light, not with noise or spectacle, but with undeniable facts and quiet authority. Meanwhile, Emily maintained her calm exterior in public. To the world, she was the composed hotel owner, the woman who had quietly reclaimed her place. But behind closed doors, the tension was palpable. She knew the Whitfords were aware of her growing strength, and their attempts to discredit her had begun. Rumors circulated, subtle attacks aimed at undermining her credibility and shaking her resolve. Yet Emily remained unmoved, fortified by the knowledge that the truth was on her side. In the days leading up to a crucial board meeting that would decide the future of several intertwined businesses, Emily sensed the shifting tides. The Whitfords' allies grew restless, their smiles brittle and forced. She was prepared to face their veiled threats and whispered warnings with the same quiet resolve that had carried her this far. Then came the moment of reckoning. At the meeting, Emily stood before a room filled with powerful figures, many of whom had once dismissed her as insignificant. She presented the evidence with clarity and confidence, letting the documents speak for themselves. The room fell silent as the magnitude of the revelations settled over the attendees. Faces blanched, alliances faltered, and the Whitfords' carefully constructed empire began to crumble. Emily's voice remained steady as she concluded, "This isn't just about money or business. It's about integrity, trust, and the courage to stand for what is right." She met the eyes of those who had tried to keep her in the shadows, and in that moment, the unspoken message was clear. She was no longer invisible. As the meeting adjourned, murmurs of support and respect followed her exit. The quiet retaliation she had orchestrated was unfolding exactly as she had planned. The Whitfords' power was waning, and Emily's comeback was undeniable. Yet beneath the triumph, a deeper question lingered. How far would they go to fight back? And was she prepared for what lay ahead? The fallout was swift and merciless. News of the boardroom revelations spread through Ashford and beyond like wildfire, igniting whispers in every corner of the county. The Whitford name, once synonymous with wealth and influence, was now tainted by scandal and suspicion. Their allies distanced themselves, their smiles replaced by cold calculation as they reassessed loyalties and futures. The empire that had seemed invincible was unraveling, thread by thread, under the weight of Emily's quiet but unrelenting assault. Emily watched it all with a steady gaze, her resolve unshaken even as the stakes escalated. The Whitfords fought back with every tool at their disposal, lawyers issuing threats, media attempts to smear her reputation, and even subtle sabotage aimed at her hotel's operations. But Emily had anticipated the storm. She moved with deliberate calm, fortified by careful planning and the knowledge that the truth was a weapon sharper than any lie. Tensions reached a fever pitch one evening when a carefully leaked story appeared in a national newspaper, painting Emily as a disgruntled outsider bent on vengeance. The article twisted facts, questioned her motives, and sought to undermine the carefully built narrative of integrity she had cultivated. Yet, rather than falter, Emily used the moment to her advantage. Through her lawyer Rachel, she issued a measured response, firm, unyielding, and backed by irrefutable evidence, turning the tide once more in her favor. Amid the chaos, Emily found an unexpected ally in James. Though their relationship remained complicated, his quiet support became a steadying force. He had been shaken by the revelations, but his guilt had evolved into determination. Together, they began to rebuild fractured bridges, their shared history a fragile foundation for a tentative future. The crescendo of this battle came at a public hearing convened to address the Whitfords' business practices. The room was packed with journalists, stakeholders, and town residents eager for answers. Emily stood before the crowd, her posture calm but commanding. She recounted the journey from betrayal to revelation, her voice steady as she laid bare the truths hidden in shadows for far too long. The air was thick with tension as she concluded, "This is not just about exposing wrongdoing. It's about reclaiming trust and restoring the values that bind us." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling into a chorus of support. The Whitfords sat silently, their empire crumbling in real time. But as the hearing ended and the crowd dispersed, Emily sensed a subtle shift, a quiet warning that this victory was only the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, and beneath the surface, darker currents were stirring. She had struck the first blow, but the true reckoning was yet to come. And as she walked away from the podium, the weight of what lay ahead settled over her like a shadow. The path to peace would demand more than courage. It would require strength she had only just begun to discover. The days that followed the hearing were a whirlwind of whispered conversations and unseen maneuvers. The Whitfords, stripped of their public veneer, retreated into the shadows where they plotted their next move. Emily knew their pride had been wounded, and pride, she understood all too well, could be a dangerous fuel for retaliation. But she was no longer the uncertain sister who had once stood on the periphery of her family's life. She was a force forged in quiet resolve and tempered by betrayal. One evening, as twilight draped Ashford Manor in soft hues, Emily stood alone on the hotel's terrace, the familiar weight of the family necklace resting against her palm. The cool air carried the distant hum of the town below, alive yet unaware of the storm that had passed, and the one still gathering. Her phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. "They're moving faster than we thought. Be ready." A calm settled over her, not the peace of surrender, but the steadiness of someone who had prepared for this very moment. The past months had taught her that revenge was not a single act of vengeance, but a quiet, relentless pursuit of justice that demanded patience, strategy, and unwavering strength. Emily's thoughts drifted to Sophie, the young woman she had welcomed to breakfast weeks ago, unsure but hopeful. That morning had reminded her why she had fought so fiercely. For every overlooked girl, every silenced voice, every hidden truth waiting to emerge. Emily's revenge was not just personal, it was a reclamation of dignity and a promise that no one would be allowed to diminish her or her family again. As the night deepened, Emily slipped the necklace around her neck, the cool metal a familiar anchor. The journey ahead was uncertain, the battles far from over, but she faced them with a quiet confidence that had been forged in the fires of betrayal and hardened by the pursuit of truth. The final move was yet to come. The Whitfords' next play, the full reveal of their desperation, and Emily's response remained a question hanging in the air, thick with tension and possibility. In the silence before the storm, Emily Harper stood ready. The reckoning was near, and this time no one would underestimate her again.